Hey everyone, and welcome back to Todos Santos. Today we're moving back over to the eastern side of town, where we're going to fill in this area with neighborhoods rich and poor, a recreational center, a whole bunch of nature detailing, and more. Let's go! So for a long while now, I've been trying to figure out what to do on this side of town, because originally I had thought that we would be doing vast areas of suburbs like we've done in other parts of the city, but for a few reasons I decided not to go for that sort of vast expansion. One of them, of course, is that we have to think about the building limit. Even though I've taken steps to put that problem off, I still don't want to do anything to exacerbate that and run into that problem again. So we are going to do some development, but not so much that we mess with the building limit at all. But there's also just the fact that it gets boring to kind of do the same sort of neighborhood over and over again, especially, after like 71 episodes now, it's like, we got to do something a little bit different. So what I decided to do was cap off the urbanized extent of Todos Santos here along the river and along the edge of the lake as well. And that's going to serve as kind of a natural boundary between this and some of the more wild areas. And also a big project that we have planned over there, but that's a problem for another episode. First, we need to get started by building a few neighborhoods. So we have this very small industrial area next to the intermodal light rail and bus rapid transit station over here on the right. And then between that and the river, there's this kind of no man's land. There's also a freeway to the south that cuts off this neighborhood. So of course we have to make this little poor neighborhood down here. I think it ends up adding kind of a nice character to this area because you have this wealthy, gentrified area over on the other side of the light rail, Buena Vista, with these giant skyscrapers. You have the fancy new rail line. You have the fancy new BRT line running directly across this neighborhood. And then you just have this little kind of forgotten area down here. And that contrast ends up setting the stage for most of the residential development we're going to do in this episode. So some of the areas have benefited quite a bit more from the redevelopment that's been going on with like the transit-oriented development and the BRT and that corridor there, and some of them haven't benefited as much. So we're going to end up alternating between rich and poor areas based on the geography and how the pre-existing roads affect how these neighborhoods develop. And if that somehow came off that I knew what I was talking about, I really have absolutely no idea. These are really just after-the-fact justifications for the builds that I thought would work at the time, but I think they make enough sense that they can kind of fit into the story of Todos Santos. A couple of the running themes of this episode are that we're going to have to decorate the river as we go with lots of grass and trees, so we get this windy green snake sort of that runs through the middle of the city. And then another one is that we're going to have to turn a lot of these buildings into POs, which I talked about a few episodes ago when I dealt with the building limit. I really don't prefer to do it this way, but I think in this case, just to make sure that we can get to the end of the series without hitting the building limit again, I'm going to do that and then increase the render distance just far enough so that they'll look good in some of the wide shots in the cinematics. And then, of course, since we do that, the buildings lose their capacity to actually function, so we have to go in and put a few of these residential blocks in here. And with all those trees down, I realized there was just one more thing to do. We have some dorks that are walking and biking down the sidewalk on the BRT lane, which we really don't want. So I turned them into a highway, and I think that should get rid of our dork pedestrian problem. Now, like I was talking about before, we're going to alternate and go into somewhat more of a wealthy neighborhood. I'm just creating a small development with these modern low-rise condo assets by the ever-dependable Smileys. Link in the description if you'd like to download these. I'm turning them into POs just so I can move them around a little bit more easily and not have to worry about giving them road connections. So I don't have to fuss around with that, and I can just place them down. And of course, we'll come back and add some residential blocks back in so we can get some population living here. Now I'm custom making some retaining walls here because my usual ones don't work very well with IMT, so I'm just using a concrete retaining wall that doesn't have any grass sticking out and then adding in my own ploppable grass props. It's not the fastest way to do it, but it is the laziest way to do it, so that's why I went with that. And I think the final result looks pretty nice. It's kind of cool to have this apartment complex up above the rail. I think that's kind of a nice look. Now, one problem with it being up on a hill like this, even though we get the cool effect with the rail, is that we get this really steep and ugly cliff going down to the river, which doesn't seem particularly realistic for me. So instead of messing around with that, I just decided to completely reroute the river. And while I'm at it, I add in some of these goosenecks, or whatever they're called. I'm not sure if that's the proper term, but that's what I'm going to call them. And I'm really glad I did that because I think it adds a nice little bit of character to the river that it didn't really have before. So I was thinking back to how we had the BRT bridge running over that other neighborhood, and that inspired me to do more or less the same thing over here, except instead of having a complete neighborhood, we're mostly going to have this kind of marshy area that has a mix of marsh and woods, and there are going to be a couple buildings that we're going to add in here after we make another poor neighborhood over on this side. And that ended up being the geography side of the story, is that a lot of this area along the river is quite marshy, so those areas are a lot harder to develop, so they don't get as much traditional investment, but you do get some of these developments popping up just to take advantage of the land that's there. On the other side of the river, we have a very similar neighborhood, although if I'm being honest, it's quite a bit lazier. So that's why we're just going to do a before and after for that. Now, despite all the stories that I'd come up with for this area, I still wasn't quite sure how to cap off this neighborhood of San Juan with the transit-oriented development. So I decided that this would be the proper place to have some of our usual low-density style of development that's a little bit more middle class than what we've been building up to now. First, of course, we need to give them the retaining wall here above the rail. It's kind of an awkward spot to have the rail down there and then all this development up here. So I didn't want to overthink it, just going to build that retaining wall. And then, of course, we need a road network to fill out this entire area. Instead of having the orientation of the roads be based off of the retaining wall and having them run parallel to each other, I decided to just base it off of the roads that are jutting out here, thinking that originally there would have just been a natural hill sloping down from this original town down to where the old rail line was, and then when that rail line was repurposed for passenger lines, formerly being used for industrial lines, that's when they would have put in the retaining wall here, just so they could fit in that little extra bit of development up here and keep it separate from the rail. Now, at this point, I ended up having some trouble with some of my visual mods, and that ended up, through a set of very weird circumstances, ended up in me not recording, filling in this area with houses for the most part. So I did manage to get this little before and after for this section. As you can see, it's basically the same as what we do everywhere else in the city, so you didn't miss too much, I don't think. And then over here, I didn't even manage to get a before and after. There are a couple of types of apartments scattered here and there, but for the most part, again, it's just the same sort of development. At some point, I emotionally recovered from having my mods break and remembered to hit record, and so we do have this area being built over here. Just this little pocket in between the BRT and the freeway, kind of a no man's land like last time, except because it's up on solid ground this time, it's just going to be our normal type of neighborhood. Although I did get a chance to use those blocks of houses that I made back in episode 68 in a vain attempt to deal with the building limit. They definitely make building these kinds of neighborhoods a lot easier. And for this little strip here, I decided to go commercial, of course, because it's along this giant BRT avenue. You're not really going to have these low-density houses along that sort of thing in this sort of development. So we're going to have some of these, and it's a mixture of wall-to-wall, and there's no setback parking, but there are a couple parking lots here, because this is sort of the tail end of the TOD, the transit-oriented development area. So they're not going to feel too sheepish about putting in some parking lots here, because it is sort of on the fringes. Now we have yet another awkward space to fill in, so I thought why not use these fairly new Puerto Rico housing buildings by Feinbolt, link in the description, once again, if you want to download these fantastic assets. Now, most of the residencials, which are like public housing sectors that we built so far, have been fairly low density with like 2 or 3 story buildings. But these just look so cool that I thought this would be a great spot to have them right next to the highway. So as you're driving by entering Todos Santos, these would be one of the first buildings that you would see. And I think it's also a nice way to cap off the BRT transit-oriented development corridor. And the final weirdly shaped plot of land to fill in is this little area that I decided to just make into a park because it's really annoying to have to fit buildings into a triangular plot of land, even when you have something like PO. It actually is pretty fun to do, but at this point I wanted to move on to the next part of the episode, which is going to involve more trees than is humanly possible to count. So earlier I was talking about how I wanted to transition from this BRT corridor to the edge of the city. And what I decided to do was take this road, which is actually the terminus of the BRT avenue, and just turn it into a normal 2-way highway that runs off into the hills, much like a lot of the roads that we built last episode. And we're not going to do really any development along this for many of the reasons that I talked about last episode. They apply here as well. We're running out of buildings, we're running out of nodes, and I'm running out of inspiration. So I wanted to at least have something over here that gives you some little bit of perspective and context at this edge of the map. So we're just running this highway, adding a couple of switchbacks here and there, and running it through the valleys to give the impression that it leads off into some town in the mountains. In an ideal world, I would definitely like to do some more building surrounding this road and trying to fill in some of these valleys, but I just don't think it's in the cards. And there's some other projects that I think are a little bit more important to the look of Todos Santos, and I would like to focus on those to finish out the series on a strong note, instead of drawing it out with a lot of the type of stuff that we've already built. Of course, I don't just want to leave this area completely bare, so we have all these hills, and of course, just like everywhere else on the map, we're going to cover it with a whole lot of trees. This is actually a very tedious process. At first, I tried using the largest brush setting, and it puts down so many trees at once that it just completely lags out the game. So after I tried that over a big swath of these hills, I decided to come back and try it with a slightly smaller brush size. And that puts down just enough trees to fill this place in quickly without causing any lag. Because when you get that sort of lag that I was talking about before, it actually kind of, like, at certain points it won't register that you're clicking on the button that puts down the trees, and so it like skips these areas of trees, and it's just really annoying to deal with. So I think it's a lot better to use about a half-size brush with a high level of strength and fairly high density, and that way you get a good distribution of trees without missing any spots, but also without putting down so many that it just kills performance for no reason. Now, I should probably clarify, when I say that we're closing in on the end of Todos Santos, we still have a couple of important projects to go, which is going to equate to something like 6 or 7 more episodes. I haven't finished recording or editing the series yet, so I can't say for sure, but something along those lines. So don't worry, there's still plenty of fun builds to do. They're just going to be a little bit more focused on specific projects rather than filling in the bulk of the city, which, as you can see, we've already made fairly good progress on. I think this area looks really nice, even though there's not any distinct development. It's just filled with a whole lot of trees, and we've even almost hit 1 million on this map, which I guess is, I don't know, that might be a good landmark to aim for. Anyway, we're going to do a little bit more terraforming now. I have this random lake that I put here on the map when I originally made the map 5 years ago or however long ago, and I didn't really know what this area was going to be like. So I thought one way to kind of motivate or maybe justify after the fact that there's not much development in this area is that this lake is going to be a lot bigger than it originally was. And of course, as we were talking about before, the river is quite a swampy place. So this whole vicinity of the lake in between the mountains and the shoreline is going to be very wet and swampy and hard to develop. And where there is dry, solid land, it's very hilly. So I think that's going to add a nice little bit of wilderness on this side of the map that also kind of explains the sort of development or lack of development that we have. And that's actually fairly accurate. East of San Juan, there are a couple of big lagoons and a very, I don't know if it's quite marshy, but a very wetland type of area. So I don't feel too bad about having that kind of landscape defining what we do over here. Now, hopping over to the other side of the river, we have this little area, which is attached to our freeway neighborhood that we made back in the very first live stream of Todos Santos. And this is another place where I originally had planned to just have this low-density style of development sprawl all the way down to the waterfront. But just like we've done in the other places, I wanted to have a mixture of that and some of this more natural stuff that we've been doing as well. So we're going to extend this road network out in the same style that we used for the rest of the neighborhood on the other side of the freeway, and fill it in with the exact same sort of development as well. And then the remaining space over to the right, after we plop down a few houses here, is going to be the site of our recreation center, but that's something we're going to get to in just a few minutes. First, we need to finish off this neighborhood. I'm really happy with how this neighborhood turned out, especially with this sort of view, except for the big seam in the sky. That's kind of annoying. But let's jump up into sky view, and we're going to take a look at the central park of San Juan, which is next to this giant interchange. We don't have a giant interchange to build it next to, so we're just going to build it on this little piece of land that juts out into the river, and we're going to have a nice area of wilderness around it, so people could come here and enjoy all the facilities of the rec center, but then they could also go on walks through the woods, which I think would be really nice. This is a build I've actually had my eye on pretty much since episode 1, in particular because there's a connection at this park to a walkway that runs along the river. And that's something I thought was really cool, and I always wanted to do it, but I just hadn't really found the spot for it. I thought about maybe doing it like when we did the university build, but it just didn't really fit into any of the episodes, and I kept putting it off. But now we're here, and I thought this was the perfect episode to do it. So really the main reason behind building this park in the first place is just to have some motivation to have that walkway along here. But I think the rec center ends up being a pretty interesting build. We have this main building here. I imagine this would be like a pool of some sort that would also have probably an indoor gym, which they could also use for conventions or whatever. I'm just using this high school building because it looked like a pretty generic, inexpensive sort of building that you would get for this sort of thing. And for some reason I decided to have these red walkways. I don't know exactly why, but I think it looks kind of nice. It's a nice contrast to the blue and gray of the building. Of course, because we're in a tropical location, there are plenty of outdoor opportunities for exercise. We have some tennis courts, actually a whole lot of tennis courts. We're going to have a few basketball courts as well. And there are going to be a couple other custom-built things in just a minute. In line with trying to bring some color to this place, I thought it would be cool to go through these tennis courts. And instead of, if you were going here to play tennis, instead of saying, we're going to court number 1 or whatever, you could identify them by the color, or maybe at least a little bit more easily identify them by the color. Plus, it just looks kind of cool, I think. You might have noticed in the reference shot that there's a bright blue, very distinctive looking track. And I wanted to do something like that, except, of course, I choose to make it red to match the rest of our color scheme. And I'm making it with IMT and just a few plain roads. Pretty simple and straightforward build, actually. Just having some white lines for the divisions between the tracks, and covering the whole thing with a red filler. And it's really easy. You only have to do it once, and then you can copy and paste it around the whole loop. And voila, you have a track. Of course, you also need the start locations. I guess I don't know what they would be called, but the place where the runners start. And those are just some more segments pasted on at the end. Of course, this is a multi-use place, so we're having a soccer field in the middle, or football field, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't really matter. Some stands on the side so people could watch whatever's going on here. And I suppose you could probably also use these little half moons at the side for some track and field type events. Much like in the inspiration, the road forms a loop around the entire facility, with some of the road area also functioning as a parking lot. And then on the other end, the road connects up to one of the avenues that crosses the major freeway that's up to the north here. I'm not sure if it's a good idea to have a road here that could work as a through road. Technically, you could take a right off of that bridge and then take this road all the way over to cross this area and bypassing the freeway. So I'm not sure if that's ideal, but it is a fairly low speed road. So I imagine that most people wouldn't take that shortcut. Now over here in between the track and the road, I wanted to take a hint from the inspiration once again and make a little bit of a plaza. And then there's also another building here, which would kind of serve as a secondary locker room for whatever's going on this side of the campus. So with a pretty good base laid down for this park, it's time to finally make it functional. I found that turning this sort of thing into a park life park obviously is going to be the most effective way to get people to this location. It's worked very well for our Isla Verde park and also for the Grand Mall of Todos Santos that we made a few episodes ago. So I'm just going to do that and put in a few of these entertainment park life blocks, clipping them into various buildings. And I think I also put an event generator in the main building, and that should attract quite a few people to this area. I would like this to be, not one of the main attractions of the city, but certainly one of the ones that is most consistently visited. So after adding a whole bunch of trees, I decided that I wanted to spice up this plaza a little bit. As realistic as it is to just have kind of a wide swath of concrete where people could, meet up and do whatever, I don't know, it felt like it needed a little bit of art here. And I'm using the term art loosely. I mean, this is a really nice sculpture asset, but I think I kind of ruin it by putting down one too many. So I delete that bottom one and maybe redeem the sculpture just a little bit. It doesn't look too excessive now, I don't think. Of course, we need lots of lighting as well, because stuff would be happening here. Probably not like late at night, but definitely until after dark, there would be people hanging out here, making use of the facility. We are getting to work on that elevated walkway that I was talking about, and it's a pretty straightforward build, if a little bit annoying to do. So I'm just drawing out straight segments here. I'm not bothering with trying to curve them. I think that would end up looking a little bit unrealistic. But of course I am following all the bends in the river and trying to fit them underneath some of these bridges when we get to those. I'm not worrying about elevation at first, I'm just worrying about the shape and making sure they're drawn along the proper angles, and then we're just going to go through and use the eyedropper function of move it, or I think it's called picker, and making sure that it only selects this network asset in particular. And then I'm going to zoom out, highlight all of those, and make sure that they're all at the same elevation, which is a lot easier than trying to manage those one by one as I draw them out. So we're connecting it over here with the hospital, and at first I was just going to end it there, and this was going to be the extent of our walkway. But I decided that it would be cool. We already have a little bit of a walkway system over by the university, not quite as extensive as this, but I thought it would be nice to connect it up to this pedestrian bridge over here. There's also a bus stop there, so theoretically you could take the bus, stop off there, and then walk or bike down this walkway all the way to Central Park, which is it's not so central of a park anymore, but I'm still going to call it Central Park. The next step is to make sure that every single node is as close to the shoreline as possible. I wanted it to look like you could go along this walkway and run your hands through the trees if you wanted to do that for whatever reason. So they're really on one side, it's just open, and you could jump down into the river, again, if you wanted to do that for some reason. And on the other, it's like basically a wall of trees, which I think is kind of a cool look. And it almost has the aerial view of like a key running along the river. Of course, it's not as big of a project as putting a key in, but it does have that straight line look that you get with a key, which I think looks really nice. Especially having it asymmetrical only on one side of the river and not on the other. I think it's kind of a nice contrast. To really sell that look of a wall of trees, of course, we're going back through and doing our usual acai palm pass. I just think this really elevates this sort of forest and makes it look a lot more realistic and a lot more to our theme. We're going to continue this line of power lines that I've been drawing since I started making videos again about just over a year ago now. It goes all the way from downtown, from the power plant that's nearby downtown at least. It goes over the hills, runs through the hospital, well, next to the hospital. And then there's the end of this neighborhood here that basically forms more or less a straight line. And so we have the perfect spot to march them through there. Of course, just having some grass cleared out underneath them so you don't have trees and stuff in danger of falling over on the power lines. And then we're just going to paint down some dense forest everywhere else. So you might be wondering why this place is called Lake Flame, and that's actually because I'm ignorant. I originally called this Llama Lake because I thought that sounded kind of funny, but apparently Llama also means flame. I didn't know that when I called it this. I was just referring to the adorable animal. But the story I came up with for that is that once upon a time, there were will-o'-the-wisps seen here, which are basically little lights that people sometimes see over swamps or bogs or that sort of place. The proposed explanation for that is that there are gases in swamps like this that can ignite spontaneously in the atmosphere. So that sort of thing goes on here. And of course, there would be a lot of lore surrounding that. So that's why this place would have been called Lake Flame. And I think that fits in nicely with the idea that we've been talking about, that it's a very marshy, swampy, hard to develop sort of location. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Todos Santos. I really hope you enjoyed your time in the city today, and I can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye-bye.